February 5th, 2026.
Midnight, Moscow time.
Imagine it. At that exact moment, the last rule book between the two countries that own 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, it just disappeared.
Simply vanished. No fanfare, no press conference. Just silence.
No more limits.
No more inspections.
No more data. For the first time since Richard Nixon was president, the United States and Russia can build as many long-range nuclear weapons as they want.
And almost nobody's talking about it.
What if I told you the world just quietly entered the most dangerous nuclear era in human history?
Because that's exactly what's happened.
Welcome to the deep dive. Stay with me for the next 36 minutes. By the end, you'll understand exactly what this means for you, your family, and whether your children will grow up in a world that still has guardrails or not.
Today, we're combing through everything. Reports from the Federation of American Scientists, declassified briefings, the whispers coming out of those last-ditch talks in Abu Dhabi.
And our mission today is, well, it's pretty straightforward. We need to turn on the lights in a room that just went pitch black.
And pitch black is the perfect way to put it. It's the metaphor the Pentagon is using.
Right, because I think for most of us, New START just sounds like another one of those bureaucratic acronyms. You hear it on the news, it goes in one ear and out the other.
Sure.
But this expiration, February 5th, 2026, people are calling it the start of the third nuclear age. That sounds incredibly heavy.
Yes, it's a fundamental shift in the geometry of global power. Think about the first nuclear age.
The Cold War.
Exactly, the Cold War. It was the U.S. versus the Soviet Union.
Bipolar, two giants just staring each other down.
Terrifying, of course. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis. Things got very close.
Yeah.
But the math was simple. It was, a staring contest. If I move, you move. If I shoot, you shoot.
Mutually assured destruction, MAD.
Right. Then came the second nuclear age, the post-Cold War world.
The 90s, the 2000s.
Yeah, a time of reductions. We were literally taking weapons apart. The narrative was that the numbers were always going down. The arrow was always pointing towards zero. We felt, I think, a false sense of security. Now the math is completely broken. We were in the third nuclear age. And it's not bipolar. It's not just Washington and Moscow staring at each other.
It's Washington, Moscow, and Beijing.
The three-body problem.
I've heard that phrase. In physics, it's supposed to be unsolvable.
It's not unsolvable, but it is chaotic. You can predict the orbit of two stars around each other perfectly. Yeah. But you add a third major body. The gravitational poles become so complex, the orbits become unstable, unpredictable.
And that's where we are now.
That's where we are. Strategists are calling this the strategic valley.
The strategic valley.
It's this incredibly dangerous period where the old rules don't apply and new rules haven't been written yet. And the old players, the ones who wrote the rules, have stopped talking to each other.
So to put it simply, we're in a dark room with two other people, everyone has a loaded gun, and the rule book just got thrown into a fire.
That is a perfect analogy. And the dark room part is literal. This is what the generals are losing sleep over. The visibility problem.
Wow.
Under New START, it wasn't just about trusting Russia. It was about verifying.
Trust but verify. The old Reagan line.
And we did. We had American inspectors on the ground in Russia walking through their most sensitive missile bases up to 18 times a year.
18 times?
We had data notifications. We had a constant stream of information. If Russia so much as moved an ICBM from a production facility to a silo field, we got a notification. Our phones would metaphorically buzz.
Okay, but I have to ask the obvious question here. We have satellites, right? We have National Technical Means, NTM. They're incredible. I mean, you can see a license plate from space. Can't we just watch them?
This is the single biggest misconception. Yes, our satellites are technological marvels. We can see a silo hatch on the ground in Siberia. We can see a submarine at its pier. We can count the missile tubes on that sub.
So what's the problem?
The problem is a satellite can't see through a 10-foot thick concrete roof.
Okay.
A satellite cannot tell you if the missile inside that silo has one warhead on its tip, or 3, or maybe even 10.
You can't see the payload.
It cannot see the payload. A satellite can't tell you if a submarine that leaves port is carrying missiles with 4 warheads each, or 8. We've gone from knowing what they have to guessing.
And in the world of nuclear strategy, guessing is bad.
Guessing is the most dangerous thing you can do. It leads directly to paranoia, which then leads to something called worst-case planning. Meaning, if I don't know for a fact that your missile only has 1 warhead, I have to assume it has the maximum possible number it can carry.
Because the consequences of being wrong are just too high.
You lose a city, you lose a country. So if I assume you're maxed out, what do? I max out my arsenal to match. Then you see me doing that, and you think I'm preparing a first strike, so you build even more.
It's a spiral.
It's an action-reaction cycle fueled by pure paranoia.
Yeah.
And it spins out of control because there's no data, no inspector on the ground to say, hey, wait, calm down. It's just one warhead.
This brings me to the so what question. I can hear someone listening to this, driving to work, thinking, okay, this sounds bad for diplomats and generals, but I have bills to pay. How does this actually affect my day-to-day life?
It affects everything. Let's start with your wallet. We are on the cusp of what the industry is calling a nuclear renaissance.
Well, renaissance sounds expensive.
The U.S. is already in the middle of a massive modernization program, replacing our missiles, our subs, our bombers. The price tag for that was already over $1.5 trillion.
Trillion, with a T.
And that number was calculated with the treaty limits in place. That was for an arsenal of 1,550 deployed warheads. If we enter a true arms race with both Russia and China, that number could double or triple.
And that's tax money.
That's your tax money. That's money that isn't going to healthcare or infrastructure or education. It's going into building more concrete holes in the ground in Montana and North Dakota.
Okay, so there's the economic cost. But there's something more direct, too. I was reading in these briefs about nuclear shadowing. It's an unsettling term.
It's very unsettling. And we've already seen it in action with the war in Ukraine. Nuclear shadowing is when a country uses the threat of its nuclear arsenal to provide cover for a conventional war.
It's Russia saying, I'm going to invade my neighbor, and if any of you in NATO try to stop me with your tanks and planes, just remember what I have in my back pocket.
It's holding the entire world hostage to a regional conflict. It creates this constant low-level hum of nuclear anxiety in the public. Every crisis, whether it's over Taiwan or in the Baltics, suddenly has a potential nuclear dimension because the guardrails are gone.
There was a quote from one of the sources that just stopped me cold. It said, "You might think the danger comes from building new weapons, but the real nightmare isn't what they build next year. It's what they can do with what they already have right now."
The upload potential. Yeah, that's the part that keeps me up at night.
We will absolutely get to that. But before we look at the nightmare scenario, I think we need to understand what we just lost. What was New START, really?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just a number on a page, was it? It was a machine.
It was the gold standard of arms control. Probably the most intrusive and comprehensive verification regime ever negotiated.
And the magic numbers were 1,550 and 700.
That's right. The treaty limited both the U.S. and Russia to 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads.
And deployed is the key word there.
It's everything. It means warheads that are physically on a missile or sitting at a bomber base, ready to be loaded, not the ones in storage. And it limited each side to 700 deployed launchers. So that's the ICBMs and their silos, the submarines, and the heavy bombers.
I mean, 550 still sounds like an astronomical number of weapons, enough to end the world many times over.
Oh, absolutely. It's civilization ending. But you have to see it in context. At the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, the two sides had a combined total of over 60,000 nuclear weapons.
60,000.
So 1,550 was a historic low. It was seen as the floor for stable deterrence. Low enough to be manageable, but high enough that neither side could think they could launch a successful first strike and get away with it.
But you said the real magic wasn't the number, it was the verification, the flashlight, you called it. Walk us through a Type 1 inspection. Let's say I'm an American inspector. My plane just landed in Russia. What happens?
Okay, so you land, you and your team. You have diplomatic immunity, but make no mistake, you are being watched by the FSB every second. You go to a designated base, let's say an ICBM field out in Siberia.
And you tell them where you want to go.
On very short notice.
Yeah.
Sometimes just 24 hours. You can point to a map of the silo field and say, we want to see silo number 42.
And you pick it at random.
Completely at random. That's the key. They can't know which one you'll pick, so they can't hide anything.
Yeah.
They have to drive you out there, and they have to open the massive concrete lid of the silo.
And you actually get to look inside.
You get to look at the top of the missile, the front end, or what's called the bus. You can visually count the number of re-entry vehicles, the warheads, sitting on top.
You can count them with your own eyes.
Yes. And you have specialized radiation detection equipment to confirm that what looks like a warhead actually has the fissile material of a warhead, and that a dummy warhead is in fact a dummy.
So if the treaty data says that missile in Silo 42 is supposed to have one warhead and you look down and see 3...
You have a major international crisis on your hands. But that's the whole point. The threat of that discovery is what kept both sides honest about the numbers. It worked.
And on top of that, there was the data exchange?
Oh, yeah. The data exchange was the boring, bureaucratic bedrock of all of this. Since 2011, the U.S. and Russia exchanged more than 25,000 notifications.
25,000.
It was like a shared Google Calendar for the apocalypse.
Chuckles. That's one way to put it.
We are moving this missile from this location to this location on this date. We are conducting maintenance on this specific submarine. We plan to test launch an unarmed ICBM from this site into the Pacific on this day.
It sounds incredibly mundane.
And that's what made it so brilliant. It was boring. It removed all possibility of strategic surprise. If our satellites detected a flurry of activity at a Russian missile base, the first thing analysts would do is check the notifications.
Oh, right. They told us they were doing an engine swap today.
Exactly. Panic averted. DEFCON level stays at 5. Everyone's pulse stays low.
And now?
Now that calendar is blank. That data stream is gone. The Bilateral Consultative Commission, this sort of dispute hotline where diplomats could meet and say, hey, we saw something weird on our satellites. Can you explain it? It's been dissolved.
So if we see a flurry of activity at that same base today...
We have to assume the worst.
There's a strange loophole in the treaty, though, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Something about how bombers were counted? The slack in the system?
Ah, yes. The bomber counting rule. This is where the fifth IS 550 number gets a little fuzzy.
How so?
Under New START, one heavy bomber a B-52 Stratofortress for the U.S., or a Tu-160 Blackjack for Russia, was counted as only one warhead against that 1,550 limit.
But a B-52 can carry way more than one weapon.
Not even close. A modern B-52 can carry up to 20 nuclear-armed cruise missiles. So on paper, it's 1. In reality, it's 20.
Why would they agree to that? It seems like a huge discrepancy.
It was a compromise. Both sides have powerful Air Force lobbies and wanted to maintain the relevance of their bomber fleets. It was a known, understood bit of creative accounting. It allowed for some flexibility and what we call upload potential without formally breaking the treaty.
And it was still contained.
Exactly. Even that loophole was inside a system of limits. Now the whole system is gone. The sky is literally the limit.
We spent 15 years meticulously counting every single missile. And now, overnight, we're back to guessing. But this didn't just happen. It wasn't a surprise on February 5th. This was a slow-motion train wreck.
A slow death is the term analysts use. To understand the autopsy of this treaty, you really have to go back to 2021.
When Biden and Putin met.
Correct. They agreed to extend the treaty for 5 years, the maximum extension allowed. And at the time, everyone in the arms control community breathed this huge sigh of relief.
Okay, we have 5 years. We bought ourselves some time to negotiate a follow-on treaty.
But they didn't use the time. Or rather, the world changed so dramatically that they couldn't. February 2022. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
And that just sucked all the oxygen out of the room.
Completely. The U.S. and Russia went from being strategic rivals to being adversaries in a hot proxy war. So in February 2023, a year after the invasion, Russia formally suspended its participation in New START.
They used the word suspended, not withdrew.
A very careful legal distinction. Their argument was, we're not quitting the treaty, but we are pausing inspections and data sharing. Their logic, from their point of view, was, well, it had a certain logic.
Which was?
They said, you Americans are actively helping Ukraine kill Russian soldiers. You're providing intelligence for strikes on Russian territory. And you expect us to just let your military inspectors wander around our most secret nuclear sites? No.
You can see their point even if you don't agree with it.
You can. To their credit, they said they would voluntarily stick to the 5,550 warhead limit. But the verification, the flashlight in the darkroom, was turned off. That's when we entered this gray zone.
And the U.S. tried to salvage it, right? I read about these last-ditch secret talks in Abu Dhabi. It sounded like something out of a spy thriller.
It was. Closed-door meetings, no press, just teams of Russian and American diplomats trying to find some common ground. The U.S. position was essentially, let's compartmentalize. We can fight about Ukraine over here, but let's keep the nuclear guardrails in place over there for the sake of the world.
Keep the issues separate.
Yes. But the Russians rejected that entirely. Their view was, no. Strategic stability is a single integrated concept. You can't be trying to cause a strategic defeat for us in Ukraine and then expect us to cooperate on nuclear treaties. It's all one thing.
They're just talking past each other.
Completely. And then the political reality of an American election year kicked in. We have to talk about the Trump factor.
Right. Donald Trump returns to the White House in 2025, and he never liked this treaty.
He always saw it as a bad deal. He felt it was badly negotiated, that it constrained the U.S. more than Russia. But his number one complaint, and this is crucial for understanding what comes next, was that China wasn't in it.
He wanted a trilateral deal, a bigger table.
His argument was, why are we tying one hand behind our back with Russia when China is over there building hundreds of new missile silos with zero restrictions? So as the 2026 expiration date got closer, his administration's public posture was basically, let it die.
I remember that quote. If it expires, it expires. Just a total shrug.
Total shrug. And the Russians, seeing that, responded in kind. Foreign Minister Lavrov said Moscow would continue to observe the limits if the U.S. did, but they reserved the right to respond to any hostile U.S. action.
It was a game of chicken.
And neither side swerved. The clock just ran out.
So the diplomats failed. The treaty is dead. Now we have to look at the hardware, at the actual arsenals, the numbers I'm about to give you. They are terrifyingly high.
They are. If you look at the latest data from the Federation of American Scientists, the total inventories are just staggering. For Russia, we're talking about a total inventory of roughly 5,459 nuclear warheads.
And the U.S.
The United States, slightly less, at around 5,177.
That's more than 10,000 nuclear weapons between just two countries.
And that's still about 90% of all the nuclear weapons on the planet. For all the talk about North Korea or Iran, this is still the main event.
But just to be clear, that's the total inventory. That includes weapons that are retired, waiting to be dismantled, right?
Correct. A large number of those are in storage, not actively deployed. The number that was really controlled by the treaty was the deployed strategic arsenal, the ones ready to go on short notice. That was the 1,550 number.
But this is where we get to the really frightening part, the concept you mentioned earlier, upload potential. Explain that to me like I'm a civilian.
Okay. Think of an ICBM, a Minuteman III missile in a silo, as a kind of school bus.
Okay, a school bus.
And that bus has, let's say, 3 seats on it, designed to carry warheads. Under New START, to get down to the Tomel-Valny 550 limit, we agreed to only put 1 kid on that bus. We left the other 2 seats empty.
So the missile is flying with less than its full capacity.
Exactly. We downloaded them, but the physical missile, the bus itself, still has the mounting points, the wiring, the space for those other 2 seats.
And the passengers, the other 2 warheads, where are they?
They're not gone. They're sitting in a climate-controlled storage bunker, maybe a few miles away from the silo field. We call it the hedge arsenal.
I think I see where this is going.
Now that the treaty is gone, there's absolutely no rule stopping us from going to that bunker, picking up the other 2 passengers, and putting them back on the bus. That process is uploading.
How fast could that happen? Is this a multi-year project?
No. That's what's so alarming. It varies. For the air leg of the triad, the bombers, you could upload hundreds of additional weapons in a matter of weeks. You just tow the cruise missiles out of their bunkers and attach them to the wings of the B-52s. For the submarines, it takes longer. Months. You have to wait for the sub to return to port for its patrol cycle. But we could add close to 1,000 warheads to the submarine fleet alone.
1,000. That almost doubles the deployed arsenal right there.
And then for the ICBMs, the land-based missiles, that takes the longest. Maybe a year, maybe 2. It's more complex. You have to open the silo, do some work on the front end of the missile. But the bottom line is stark.
Which is?
Without building a single new missile, without pouring an ounce of new concrete, both the U.S. and Russia have the technical ability to double the size of their deployed nuclear arsenals in about a year.
Just by taking weapons out of storage and putting them back on the launchers they were designed for.
It's an instant arms race, not one of manufacturing, but of logistics. And if we start doing it, you can bet Russia will do it. And if they do it, we will accelerate.
It's pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire.
And we haven't even mentioned the other player who just walked up to the fire with a flamethrower.
China.
China, the wild card that breaks all the old Cold War models.
Let's talk about that. For decades, China's nuclear policy was, what, minimum deterrence?
That's right. They kept a small, survivable arsenal, maybe a couple hundred weapons, just enough to guarantee that if anyone hit them with a nuclear weapon, they could hit back. It was a purely defensive posture.
And they kept their weapons demodded, I read. What does that mean?
It means the warheads were stored separately from the missiles. To launch a weapon, they would have had to physically transport the warhead, mount it on the missile, fuel the missile. It would take hours, maybe days. It was a deliberate choice to show they weren't planning a surprise first strike.
That has changed.
Radically. What we are witnessing right now is what analysts call a strategic breakout. We've all seen the satellite images from the deserts in western China. Yumen and Hami.
The so-called wind farms.
That was the initial cover story. These vast fields of what looked like construction sites for wind turbines. But when analysts looked closer, they realized what they were seeing. Hundreds of new missile silos. 120 here, 110 there.
And these are for modern missiles.
These are for their new solid-fuel ICBM, the DF-41. Solid fuel is key. It means the fuel is already in the rocket. It's stable. It can sit there for years, and when you get the order, you just turn the key, and it launches in minutes.
So they're moving from a we can hit you back eventually posture to a we can hit you instantly posture.
They're moving to a launch-on-warning posture. They're sprinting to achieve nuclear parity with the United States and Russia. The Pentagon's latest estimate is that China is on track to have 1,000 warheads by 2030 and maybe 1,500 by 2035.
So for the first time, a U.S. president has to sit in the Situation Room and plan for two nuclear peers.
This is the two-peer problem. It is the absolute nightmare scenario for American war planners.
Yeah.
The old logic of deterrence was one-on-one. How do you deter Russia and China at the same time?
Because if you get into a major conflict with one of them.
Let's say, God forbid, a nuclear exchange with Russia. You use a significant portion of your arsenal, Russia uses theirs, both countries are devastated. But what happens next?
China's still standing there.
China is sitting there with its arsenal untouched. You're now vulnerable to coercion or attack from a third party. So the military planner starts asking, do I need an arsenal big enough to fight Russia and still have enough left over to deter China?
The answer is obviously yes.
Which means you need numbers far, far greater than 500, 550.
So the expiration of New START happened at the exact moment the strategic rationale for its limits evaporated.
The dam broke just as the floodwaters began to rise.
And it's not just about the number of weapons, it's the type. The briefs you sent over were full of these new, almost sci-fi weapons. Let's start with Oreshnik.
Oreshnik. Russia test-fired this into Ukraine in late 2024. It was a signal to the West.
What's a hypersonic missile?
It's more than that. It's an intermediate-range missile carrying multiple hypersonic glide vehicles. The speed is incredible, Mach 10 or more. But the real game changer isn't speed, it's maneuverability.
It doesn't fly in a predictable arc.
Exactly. A traditional ballistic missile flies like a cannonball. You can track its trajectory and calculate where to intercept it. A hypersonic glider skips along the edge of the atmosphere. It can weave, it can dodge. It creates what defense experts call a zero interception window. Our current missile defenses just can't hit it.
And the flight time from Russia to a European capital?
Minutes. 5 to 10 minutes to hit Berlin or London.
There's no time for a leader to make a decision.
It compresses the decision-making loop to almost nothing. You see a launch, you have to decide instantly if it's nuclear or conventional and what to do about it. You don't have time to think.
Then there's the Poseidon, the doomsday torpedo. This one sounds like it's straight out of a James Bond movie.
It's a weapon of pure terror. It's a massive, nuclear-powered, autonomous underwater drone.
Like a torpedo the size of a school bus.
Essentially. And because it's nuclear-powered, its range is basically unlimited. It can be launched from Russia, travel halfway around the world, and just wait. Loiter off the coast of New York or Los Angeles for weeks.
And its warhead is designed to create a radioactive tsunami.
That's the concept. It's a dirty cobalt bomb. The goal isn't just to destroy a port city, but to make hundreds of miles of coastline uninhabitable for generations. It's a weapon of vengeance, not war.
A way to bypass missile defense.
If we build a shield in the sky, they go underneath it in the water.
So what's the U.S. doing to counter this? We have the new Sentinel missile program, right?
But we do. Sentinel is the program to replace our 1970s-era Minuteman III ICBMs. And those Minutemen are old. I mean, we're talking about systems that, in some cases, still use 8-inch floppy disks.
You're joking.
I wish I was. Sentinel is desperately needed, but the program is in trouble. It's way over budget, years behind schedule. The cost has ballooned so much that there's now a real debate in Congress about whether we can even afford to finish it.
So while Russia is fielding hypersonics now and China is building hundreds of silos now,
we're struggling to keep 50-year-old missiles working while we wait for their replacement to maybe show up in the 2030s. It creates a perceived window of vulnerability.
You take all of this together, the lack of inspections, the new players, the new technologies, it all points to what feels like the single greatest risk. Not that someone wakes up and decides to start a war, but that they start one by accident.
Miscalculation. That is the single word that defines the third nuclear age. With the lights out, with no on-the-ground verification, we are totally dependent on what our satellites tell us.
And satellites can be fooled.
Easily. Are those 100 new Chinese silos full of real missiles? Or are many of them empty decoys designed to make us waste our weapons targeting them? We don't know. When a Russian mobile ICBM launcher moves into a forest, is it for a training drill, or are they dispersing to hide from a first strike? We don't know.
And if you're a general in the Pentagon, looking at that satellite feed in real time,
You have minutes to make a recommendation to the president. And without that treaty data to give you context, without that history of notifications, your bias is always going to be to assume the worst.
it's that worst-case planning cycle again.
The cascading failure. A suspicious satellite image leads the U.S. to raise its alert status. We might put more bombers in the air. Russia sees that, and their early warning systems go crazy. The Americans are posturing for an attack, so they raise their alert status. They might start moving warheads out of storage.
And China sees all of this happening.
And China says, I'm not going to be the one caught flat-footed, so they bring their silo fields to full readiness. And suddenly, you have 3 nuclear powers with their fingers on the trigger, all reacting to shadows, because no one can just pick up the phone and ask, hey, what are you guys doing?
I've heard it called the thin crust of stability.
And that crust just shattered on February 5th.
So here we are, standing on that shattered crust. The treaty's gone, the arsenals are ready, the upload could begin. What happens tomorrow? What happens next?
Well, the immediate future is likely to be a very strange, intense limbo. We might actually see a brief period of what's called informal compliance.
A kind of gentleman's agreement. After everything you've said, that sounds wildly optimistic.
It's not driven by trust. It's driven by budgets.
Ah, money.
Right. Neither side really wants to spend the billions of dollars it would cost to upload the entire arsenal right now. Russia's economy is strained by the war. The U.S. has its own massive budget deficits. So for a short time, they might both just tacitly stick to the 1,550 limit to save money.
But without verification.
Without verification, the paranoia will fester. Neither side will ever truly believe the other is sticking to the deal. And then you have the political wildcards, like President Trump's proposal for a Golden Dome.
A massive space-based missile defense shield over America.
It's a concept he talks about a lot, an impenetrable shield. And it sounds fantastic to the average person. Who wouldn't want to be perfectly safe from missile attack?
But strategically, it's a nightmare.
It's a complete paradox.
Yeah.
If you try to build a perfect shield, your adversary doesn't just throw up their hands and surrender.
They just build more missiles to overwhelm the shield.
Exactly. Or they build weapons like the Poseidon torpedo that go under the shield. Or hypersonics like Oreshnik that are too fast and maneuverable for the shield to hit. A major push for missile defense ironically guarantees a massive offensive arms race by your adversaries. It forces their hand.
The expert outlook here is just bleak. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist says the risk of nuclear use is higher now than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I think that's right. We're moving into an era of what one analyst called irresponsible deterrence.
Meaning?
During the Cold War, for all its terror, there was a sense of sobriety. Nuclear weapons were the ultimate last resort.
Yeah.
You didn't talk about them lately.
And now?
Now you have world leaders and television pundits casually talking about using tactical nuclear weapons as if they're just another tool in the toolbox. The taboo is eroding. And when you normalize the language of nuclear use, you get dangerously close to normalizing the act itself.
Which brings us back to the person listening to this. It can all feel so big, so overwhelming that the natural human reaction is just to tune it out.
You can't. This isn't just news. This is the new environment you are living in. The very air you breathe now contains a statistically higher probability of becoming radioactive than at any time in the last 50 years. That's not hyperbole. It's just math.
So what's the call to action?
Vigilance. Don't let this story fade away. Demand that this becomes a central issue. We have to force our leaders to find a way to start talking again.
A new phone line.
More than that, a new framework, one that includes China. The old bilateral model is dead. You cannot win a three-way arms race. The math simply doesn't work. You have to find a diplomatic off-ramp. We found a way to agree with the Soviets, who we despised, that blowing up the planet was a bad idea. We have to find that common ground again.
So that is the fundamental question of the next decade. Will we see a new agreement? Or will the upload begin? Will we just sit here and watch those numbers climb from 1,550 to 2,000, 3,000, and beyond?
And the answer will determine the kind of world our children inherit.
The doomsday clock didn't just move forward. It feels like someone just took the batteries out, and we don't know what time it is anymore.
And in the dark, it's very easy to stumble.
That's our deep dive. A heavy topic, I know, but one we simply cannot afford to ignore. We'll keep tracking the data, the satellite photos, and the rhetoric. Stay informed.
And stay safe.